Today's episode has been brought to you by
Schedulicity.
Welcome to episode 53 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. Today, we meet Chase Bossart, a yoga therapist who studied one-on-one in India with Mr. Desikachar. I had so many questions for Chase today around the topic of mentors and lineage, and as usual, Chase gave answers that made me ponder my own yoga for days. He has a way of doing this in such a light-hearted manner. Today's episode is for all of you who are or who might have faced an end of or a letting go of a mentor or a lineage, or for anyone who is questioning yoga lineage and wanting to learn a little bit more about yoga philosophy and the history behind it. Just listening to Chase's stories, wisdom, and laughter offers so much, so I am thrilled to share this with all of you connected yoga teachers. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I'm a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a consultant for yoga teachers who want to create a sustainable yoga business that lights them up. Over the years in teacher trainings and through the consulting work that I do, yoga teachers have told me that they feel disconnected and alone in the wilderness of yoga entrepreneurship. I get it. I have felt this way. This sparked the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, a place where you can feel supported and connected every week between the classes, workshops, and trainings that you are teaching or attending. Together, we hear from yoga teachers and other professionals who share information, ideas, stories, and actionable steps. If you want to meet up in person with me, I am co-teaching a prenatal yoga teacher training. It's the Mama Nurture RPYT course in Meaford, Ontario over 3 weekends, and that starts soon. It starts in April. Also, I'm teaching a 2-day, 20-hour yoga for pelvic health teacher training, also in Meaford, in May of 2018. To see the in-person trainings, the consultation call work that I do, or the online courses that I offer, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and check it out there. If after you listen to this episode today, you have more questions or thoughts around today's episode, make sure to post them in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. This is a group for yoga teachers and those of you who are in a yoga teacher training right now. And if you feel like it, tag Chase in any of your questions or comments. To join that group, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and click on the join button right from our homepage. Also, have a listen to where Chase talks about how you can book a free 30-minute interview with him to be matched with a yoga mentor. I actually just learned about it while doing this interview with Chase, and I've already sent in my email because I want to give this a try, so I'll keep you posted on that for sure. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, let's hear from our sponsor before we dive in and meet Chase.
Hello, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Shannon with your Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. The art of yoga has been handed down from teacher to teacher for the last 5,000 years. The internet, while born in the 1960s, has really only been around as we know it since the 1990s. It changed the way we do everything, and it continues to evolve every day. While you worry about mastering and sharing 5 millenniums worth of physical and spiritual wisdom, Schedulicity can keep you up to date. Spend your time mentoring students, not managing appointments.
Thank you so much, Shayna, for that hot tip of the week. It is an absolute honor to introduce you to Chase Bossart. Chase met and began to study with Mr. T.K.V. Desikachar in 1991. He has a master's degree in religious studies with an emphasis on Indian philosophy. Chase lived and worked in China for 8 years, where he became fluent in Mandarin. He grew up in Seattle and now lives just north of San Francisco. Since 2003, Chase has had yoga as his sole occupation. He has over 10 years where he's been working as a yoga therapist in his private practice. He travels around the world offering workshops and trainings on a wide array of yoga and yoga therapy topics. Chase's teaching style is warm, funny, and engaging with lots of practical examples. You're going to hear that today in the call for every level of yoga practitioner from beginner to advanced. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Chase. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Shannon. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit, for those of you, I feel like you're one of the lead yoga teachers out there, and I don't follow you on Instagram. I don't even know if you're on Instagram.
Uh-oh, you sound like my admin.
And I feel like I know you really well through other yoga teachers, especially my partner, Sean, who you're one of his main teachers, and he still does meditation with you weekly. So I feel like your name and your voice and your yoga is in our house regularly. But tell others like a little bit of your yoga journey. Where did it even begin?
Okay, thank you very much for that intro. A senior in college and went on a study abroad program in 1991. 21 years of age. I met, as part of that program, there was a yoga theory class that was taught. So it was a semester-long class, met twice a week for an hour and a half, and it was in Chennai, India, and it just happened to be taught by Mr. T.K.V. Desikachar. And at this point in my life, I really was searching. I was a philosophy major. I was really looking for answers. I was trying to figure out, why are we here? What is the meaning in life, etc. And I wasn't really finding answers that satisfied me. And part of the reason for going to India was I thought, well, I'll be able to read some Indian philosophy and study that in a deep way. And, we'll check out this yoga thing. I don't really know what that's about. But anyway, we'll see. Anyway, I got in this room, and twice a week, Mr. Desikachar came in, and just in the very simplest and most accessible terms, he just explained, like, this is who you are. This is why you suffer in life. And this was really the kicker for me. And this is what you do about it. And by the end of the semester, I was just fully, completely bought in. I couldn't believe it. What a deal. Where do I find more of this?
Right, all of the answers right there.
All the answers right there, but really, actually, all of the, it wasn't. What the beauty of it is, it's not somebody else's answers. It's methodology to help each of us find our own answers, and that really just floated my boat. So, over the last, guess what is it now, 26 years, I've spent almost 5 years in Chennai. The longest time I was there at one shot was 2 years, and studying with Mr. Desikachar and his family, and at his nonprofit organization called the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mantra. And while I was in India for the 2-year program, or for the 2 years, I was a teacher there, and I had my own clients and was overseen by senior teachers. And for those who don't know, the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram is a yoga therapy clinic. So most of what they do is individual, one-on-one, tailored to whatever physical, emotional, mental difficulty the person is having. And they get referrals from all over the city and the area. And it's just a really bustling, amazingly busy yoga therapy clinic. So they use breathing, attention, sound, gentle movements, etc., to address a wide range of difficulties.
So that was in what year? Like, how long has that place been running? I'm just trying to think now. There's feel like it's a new wave of yoga therapy, and you're saying this is long before that.
Yeah. So Mr. Desikachar and A.G. Mohan co-founded the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram in 1976.
42 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Really the hallmark of Mr. Desikachar's teaching, really the hallmark of Vinaya Yoga has been this one-on-one teaching. Everything is individualized, tailored to meet the capacities and the needs of the person. Of course, in the U.S., we do group classes, etc. But in India, the group classes are really only for functional things like children's class, where kids come together for a social hour, some other physical issues that people can commiserate if they come together. And that's really the only group classes. Everything else is one-on-one, tailored. You meet with the person maybe every other week or maybe every 3 or 4 weeks, and you're practice is adjusted based on what's happening in your system and what sort of changes have happened as a result of your doing the practice. And the rest of it is really you participating in your own healing on your own time through doing the practice.
That's amazing. I feel like more and more that is what I gravitate towards. I still do teach a group class every once in a while, like 11 weeks. And then that spills over into, now I work at a physiotherapy office one-on-one with people doing yoga. And I love that time. Like, I feel like I can check in with them right there. I can ask them, like, how's that feeling? Whereas in a group class, I cannot check in with everyone.
I agree. I really agree. So I also teach group class. I did this meditation that you're mentioning. I teach online a meditation class every Wednesday morning, half hour. That's a group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a group online and virtually, so it's not like you can check in with how everyone is doing as well. But
it's correct. Quite a number of people are not showing up for the class. They're just watching the video of the class afterwards. So I never even see them.
I think, though, knowing in our household, like, we're a very far distance away from you, it's important to be able to have that in this day and age that we can, well, even us doing this call today, we can do this virtually on Skype and share it with other yoga teachers.
Yeah, it's a different world. It really is. And, I will say that I find the feeling that comes in leading the online meditations is as strong as the feeling I get being in the room with meditators. And that has really been a surprise to me. I was thinking, well, this is not going to work because, there's something that happens through the connection of the student and the teacher being in the same room, in the same place, etc. And I mean, I've been doing it now more than 5 years, and I am stunned by how consistently the feeling is as powerful as being in the same room. And, people are literally thousands of miles away.
That's fascinating. That's good to hear because I first heard you talk on a podcast with Jay Brown, and I think the title was Old School.
Right.
Like, you were the old school. You're like one of the original, I think he called it authentic, in his words, yoga.
Yeah.
So I think that's empowering for yoga teachers to hear you say, you know what, you can also be doing this virtually.
You really can. The other thing I do online that's really has a small group feel for me is on Thursday nights I teach Yoga Sutras and Bhagavad-Gita, so an hour each, and we go line by line, word by word through each of those texts, talking about what is the meaning in Sanskrit and grammatically how does it work, and then really importantly, how does that apply to one's life? What does that look like? How does that manifest in the way that my behavior is, or my relationships, or my decision making, etc. And this is another one where it's just like being in a small room with the people. I mean, you can see them all on the computer, and we pause and take questions and respond to that, and people share, and I'm just stunned. I really feel like it's like I'm in the same room with them. It really is amazing, actually, the technology these days.
Well, I got looking at that, and that brings one question that I really wanted to ask you. I get asked it so often, is around Sanskrit. Like, so one, yoga teachers can, or yoga students can join you online and learn a little bit more about Sanskrit and the sutras. Is that correct?
That is true.
And then, so my question around that is, do you use Sanskrit when you're teaching, say, one-on-one, you're working with someone?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is it depends.
Right.
So, that's actually our new corporate sponsor, because that's the answer to everything. It depends.
It's so true.
So I'm joking about that. But, what I would say is that what's missing in today's Western yoga world is the context of practice. If you go on YouTube, you can find literally a million videos of people explaining how to do yoga techniques. Here's how you breathe. Here's how you move. Here's how you put your body in this position. Here's how you put your body in that position. Here's how you draw your belly in and roll it around, or, put your fingers on your nose. You can find any technique you want on YouTube. The thing that's much harder is, why would I do that technique?
Right.
What is the context of of techniques. And, yoga is really a coherent science of how the human system functions. And its tools are experience. It is a way that it understands how the human system responds to experiences. And then we can think of yoga as a series of intentionally engineered experiences. And these experiences influence the way that my body functions, or the way that my posture is, or the way that my mind or that my emotions work, etc. So if we have like an understanding of how yoga views the human system, then we can then start understanding like, oh, here are the experiences that will be useful for my system and why. And to me, that really is the piece that's missing. And that is actually pretty well defined in the Sanskrit texts. Like if you look at Yoga Sutra, it's a amazing presentation of how the mind functions. Amazing. And if you look at Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it's a very interesting and useful presentation of how prana functions in the body and what that means for health and longevity, etc. And so I really find that, let's take one more example, is Bhagavad-Gita. Bhagavad-Gita is such a beautiful presentation of spirituality and how to navigate difficult situations in life. And all of this stuff is pretty well presented and very, pretty detailed, and the context is really there. But somehow it hasn't really come over into our yoga culture to the same degree that the practices have. So I do take Sanskrit words and use them in my one-on-one teaching, especially if the person is like really getting into the yoga and I can see that like, a deeper interest might be here. Then I will mention a concept like Shraddha, which is conviction or confidence, and often gets translated as faith or belief. And one of the things Patanjali says is that our development or evolution is directly linked to the strength of our faith, the strength of our conviction or confidence in something. So I will tie that into the person's practice and show them like how much faith they're demonstrating by their doing the practice every day and what they're getting out of it. That sort of thing. But I agree that it's not very useful to just give a lecture and be throwing Sanskrit terms here and there, because who knows what they mean. I may think they mean one thing, you may think they mean another. So what good does it do if we're just like talking Sanskrit?
Right. Well, I love that you give a context into someone's own experience, bring that down into something really rooted in what is applicable to their own life and their own yoga practice. And I do feel like you have this ability, and I know that you have studied Sanskrit and studied philosophy, but you have this ability, and maybe it's through your teacher, as you were saying, to really filter that through and then explain it to people.
Thank you.
If I go to,
let me just say one thing on there and just say that, I really feel that was the hallmark of Mr. Desikachar's teaching, is that he really broke it down and made it straightforward and understandable. And he really valued like, hey, this is not pie in the sky. This is not, flowers in the sky, etc. This is real life. And the whole point of this is that it influences how we feel and behave and choices that we make and what we do, and whether or not I actually sit comfortably and talk to somebody. And so it is so real life and practical. And I feel that for me, when you make that comment, I just feel like, oh, thank you, Mr. Desikachar. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a huge gift. And, You said it like flower in the sky, and that's exactly how I feel. I feel like it's out of reach sometimes for me as a yoga teacher, whereas if I take an anatomy or a science textbook, I feel like I can pull that in a little easier. That's my own experience. So I need to have someone who can explain it to me in a way that really makes sense, and I also need to have it in little drips. Like I remember being in my 200-hour yoga teacher training thinking, oh my gosh, this is so much to take in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do these philosophy classes I do on Thursday evenings. We cover a little less than one sutra an hour. It's basically we take 3 classes to do 2 sutras. And so, we take it really slowly. And over time, everything fits together, and you can really see that actually Patanjali is not talking about very many topics. He's really talking about only, a handful of topics at most. But he talks about each one in so many different ways that it takes a while to see how the different ways that he's talking about it tie together. And that is, I agree, it's just something you just take a little bit and you start to think about it and apply. And then the next week you take a little bit more and think about it and apply and a little bit more. That's really the only sustainable transformation. Fast transformation is not sustainable. You make a change and then
like someone was asking me, what about a yoga teacher training in 3 weeks, a 200-hour? And I just thought, how is that possible?
There's a distinction. I feel there's a really important distinction to be made between yoga as information and yoga as being. And the whole point of information is to support the being. And if we the state of yoga as a state of being, or as a way of perceiving events in my life, the way of understanding like what is happening as it's happening, is not something that happens overnight. And I really strongly believe that teacher training should be minimum of a year, preferably more like 18 months or longer, because it gives people time to digest the ideas, play them out in their life, get some feedback. You had a question about, you said that you're going to have a question about a teacher and lineage and whatnot. We get an opportunity to implement it with the guidance of somebody. That takes time. 3 weeks is like, it makes me want to cry.
Yeah, I get it. My first yoga teacher training was over a year. My teacher, I actually traveled to Toronto, which is 3 hours away, and then learned once I got to the first class that my teacher actually lives only 20 minutes from my house, but I had to travel far to find her. And I did love that, go home with this information and try it on in your life. And I wanted to ask you about that whole lineage teacher. I think because looking at your bio page right away, you really honor and thank your teacher. And I feel like reading it, I hear the foundation that you have in your lineage. And I want to get your thoughts on that. Like, how important is that? Because you studied one-on-one. You actually lived, didn't you?
I did. I didn't live with him, but I lived right around the corner.
From Desikachar.
Yeah, and I had pretty much 1 to 2 1-hour classes with him 6 days a week.
Wow.
And then at other times I would have individual chanting classes with Menaka, his now widow, and I would be at KYM and observing them, seeing one-on-one classes with the sick clients that came, etc. So from my perspective, I don't believe that this way of being can be fully transferred or fully digested by somebody without a reliable outside reference. In North America, we have this idea about the self-help section of the bookstore, and to me, that's a fallacy.
I'm laughing because I gravitated to there so often in my life, and I was like, "Oh, this book is going to have all the answers."
Right. And one of the ideas here in yoga is that we don't know what we don't know, and until we're suffering from it, and it's so different to have somebody who already knows the way walking along with you, and when you like stray off into the bushes and start heading down into the ravine, who can basically grab you and be like, hey, no, it's over here, path is over here, and who can serve as a mirror and say to you, you sound clear to me. I think you're clear. You feel clear to me. Or, I'm not sure that this is the best course of action. Why don't you think about it a bit more? Why don't you reflect on it a bit more? Or, it has been my experience, and I do this for my students as well, that sometimes the most kindness is the thing that's the hardest to hear. And you have to have a relationship that is already established with demonstrated care and attention, and in order for that to be effective. Otherwise, you just feel vulnerable, and then you get hurt and angry. And but if you have an established relationship where the person already has your best interests in mind and has demonstrated it, when you hear them say, Chase, I'm viewing your behavior as having this element that I think you need to reflect on, instead of going like, yeah, well, beep, beep, beep. You go like, ouch, okay. Well,
Do you remember a time like this in your own time with Desikachar where he called you on something and it was not the easiest thing to hear?
Oh, yeah, several times.
Will you share one of those examples?
Well, yeah, sure. I'll give you an example. One time I went to, I came to India, and I'd planned to be there for 3 months. And for 5 weeks, I was there for the first 5 weeks. He had me stand up and in front of the group every day, and he would publicly humiliate me around my being arrogant, and that the way that the way that I answered questions, or the way that I gave opinions and whatnot, was showing that I thought I already knew the answer. And so, I mean, this was pretty hard, actually, 5 weeks. And then at the end of 5 weeks, he said, I want you to go on a pilgrimage and reflect. And I said, okay, sure. And I said, fine, I need to get out of here. This has been really awful. Oh my God.
You're like, I'm leaving. Help. Did you ever think I'm done?
I think, occasionally that kind of thing comes in, but, he really had, at this point, I had already been with him 15 years or so. And there had just been so many demonstrations of him accurately seeing my weakness and really giving me tools to develop a strength. I really trusted him. So at the end of 5 weeks, he essentially said, I want you to go on this pilgrimage. All right, he didn't essentially say, he said, I want you to go on this pilgrimage. And I said, okay, fine. And, where's the pilgrimage? And basically the pilgrimage site was back in America. He was essentially sending me home to think about his communications of the past 5 weeks. And, here I'd set this all up to be in India for 3 months. And I was like, all right. So then he said to me, I want you to go to this church outside of Santa Fe. It's in Chimayo, outside of Santa Fe. He said, I want you to go to this church, and I want you to, when you're there, you're going to have a 7 days of silent retreat. And every day I want you to walk around the church 108 times in the morning and 108 times in the evening. And when you did that, every time you walk around, you stop and you do some breathing. And he gave me the ratio he wanted me to do and all this stuff. And so the first day, it took 6 hours to do the 108 in the morning. So
oh my gosh,
I couldn't stop. I had to keep going through all the way through. And in the evening, I called him and I said, "Sir, it's Chase." And he said, "I've been expecting your call." So he's checking to see if I'm going to listen to him or if I'm going to make the decisions myself about like, oh, this is too hard. I'll just do, a few less or whatever the deal is. So he said, oh, yeah, I've been expecting you. Do 54 in the morning, do 54 in the afternoon.
You're like, that's still going to be 6 hours.
Yeah, well, so and I didn't see him again for another 9 months after that. And what I would say is something happened in the practice of doing that for 7 days and not speaking to anybody and really, walking for 6 hours a day around the church and doing breathing, is that, some experiential things started to develop for me. And then the rest of when I went home and when I went back to San Francisco, the rest every day when I did my afternoon meditation practice, like that feeling that had started to show up at Chimayo showed up again. And slowly over time, it really developed. And so what I see is that he gave me the tools that I needed to I don't know if solve is the right thing, but to develop a different pattern, to move in to have some refinement of my person and of my behavior, etc. He gave those tools at the same time as he was really giving me some suffering around, hey, stop communicating like this.
Now,
and
what would happen?
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I have to have that. I have to have that faith in him, or in really the faith in the practices that he's leading to have that come to fruition.
This your story reminds me slightly of stories from my first yoga teacher. So Satdharam Kaur studied with Yogi Bhajan, and she talked about different practices that he gave to his students. And I remember thinking, I would just be a puddle on the floor crying, and I don't think I would finish my teacher training. And so I wonder, taking someone like me, if I went to show up and I was like, I'm going to India, I'm just trying to put myself in that situation. I think, again, I guess that you were working with him for 15 years, you already knew and you had faith in the practice and him. Is there some part of you that looks at it and thinks, wow, who else would do that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, on his side, not mine.
Yeah. But I mean both sides.
What I mean is that, he taught different people in different ways. Same thing is there with Krishnamacharya. Like if you look at all of the different teachers that came out of from studying with Krishnamacharya, you get Mr. Iyengar, you get Mr. Patabi Joyce, you get Mr. Desikachar, you get Mr. A.G. Mohan. There's so much difference there. There's so much difference. And you go, well, wait, so what was Sri Krishnamacharya's teaching? And the answer is really like, well, who's the student? And right. Then, so in some ways to call something a lineage is really farcical, because it's a set of teachings, and the set of teachings is based around principles that have been passed down from one generation to the next in experiential form. And what one person needs to be able to find that state in themselves and be able to develop their own human system, their body, their mind, their emotions, etc., in order to support a state of yoga is so different than what the next person needs. And I think you really see that in Mr. Desikachar's teachings. Right now there's a kerfuffle around the word Vini-yoga.
Yes, I just heard Sean shared a link with me.
So Vini-yoga is a Sanskrit word that means application. And in the 70s, when Mr. Desikachar was teaching, and his students were saying, we need to know what to call this. And he said, what do you mean? It's yoga. Call it yoga. Right. They're like, well, you see, there's some other yoga teachers, and if we call it yoga, then how do they know how to find us or what we're doing and stuff? And he basically said, I don't know. Call it yoga. Right. So in the mid 70s, perhaps early 70s, perhaps 73, 74, the details are before my time. He said, all right, we'll call it Vini-yoga. In other words, we'll call it application of yoga. And then in 2004, an email was sent out by Mr. Desikachar. I personally believe it was written by his son, But the email said, I feel like it will be better if we just start calling it yoga again rather than Vini yoga. And in some regards, you can't say, well, this is what the lineage is, because the teachings are the main focus, and the teachings interact with and flow through somebody in an individual way. I cannot be Mr. Desikachar. Neither can his son be. Neither can any of his students be. I mean, the best we can do is just each of us to be ourselves. And, I have gravitated to meditation and philosophy and chanting and spirituality, daily application of philosophy in real life. Those are the things that really float my boat. Therapeutic application of yoga. These are the things that really are interesting to me. And, somebody else, they're interested in asana and the way that we course plan, and how do you link some asanas in order to be able to efficiently do complicated posture, etc. So, what to call all of this is very difficult. I call my organization is called Yoga Well Institute, because a well is a kind of technology that allows you to access a resource which you otherwise wouldn't have access to. And that's yoga. Yoga connects us with really essential parts of who we are, and allows that to flow in our life. Should we call it Vini yoga? Should we call it Desikachar yoga? Should we call it Krishnamacharya yoga? These are really good questions.
I love that you have questions about it. For our listeners who maybe don't know, then Krishnamacharya was the father of your teacher, Desikachar.
Correct. He was the brother-in-law of Mr. Iyengar.
Right. So in that, do you see now, like in many ways, I love to look kind of like a family tree of yoga, like where did everything come from? And also at the same time, I really have felt it in myself, and I hear it in other people, that it can be very divisive, like dividing different groups of yoga. Oh, well, that's your kind of yoga. Well, my yoga is the real authentic yoga.
Right. Well, we're correct. I don't know what you're doing, but we're want to study some yoga, then come over here.
Yeah.
This again, I think this happens in any religious organization, and I don't want to say yoga is a religious organization, but there is a danger when the essence of something starts to be equated with the form, and any function has to be delivered in form. You can't, there is no such thing as function without form. Form is not valuable in and of itself. Form is valuable only in the way that it delivers the function. I think the same thing should be said of lineage. The same thing should be said of teachings. You can say the same thing of religions. We shouldn't value form above the function. We shouldn't value the nuts and bolts of things above the demonstration of somebody's understanding and realization. One of the things that Mr. Desikachar used to say is, he said, if you want to test somebody's practice, don't test their abhyasa. Don't test their effort. Don't test, their asana. Don't test what kind of asana can they do, or how much effort can they put forth, etc. Test their vairagyam. Test their capacity to relinquish. In other words, don't look at the way that somebody is doing. Look at the way that somebody is demonstrating their relinquishing, And to me, that's just like really the heart of the matter. We shouldn't really care what is the form, because it's going to differ of necessity for every single person on the planet. What we should be able to care about is, are their relationships improving? Are they able to, know what their knowing is and follow it? Are they becoming more authentic in themselves? Like, there we go. There's yoga.
Right.
What do you want to call that? Yoga. Good yoga.
That's a lot to chew on. I feel like I almost need an example of this relinquishing, that I'm sitting here wondering, what does that look like? How can you see someone relinquishing?
Yeah, it's a real good question. Relinquishing looks like we get attached to the way things are, right? We get attached that I'm a member of this group, or I live in this house, or I go to this place 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, and I do this task, etc. And lots of times we get bought into that as the primary thing. And then we become so attached to that we're not able to pivot or respond to situations in our lives. So I had a recent example of a student who was living in Port Townsend, Washington. He had this dream job and was loving it. And yet his oldest son was having all kinds of, once they moved to Port Townsend, he started having all kinds of health issues. So, and after sort of a couple of years of trying to figure out this and that, basically they determined that it was likely that it had something to do with the local paper mill, and that the only solution was that they had to leave the entire area. So here he's got his dream job. Here he's like set up and really psyched to move forward. And then something else is really important is happening. And, the power of yoga is that it helps us to see like what's really important and to let go of other things that might not be as important, but can easily block. So he ended up resigning, and they moved back across to the East Coast. And the health of his son improved the moment they left, and he was able to find like another job that is okay. It's but it's not the thing that's really was floating his boat. But that would be an example of vairagya.
I'm thinking of so many things that I attach to now.
Yeah, if you Bhagavad, sorry to interrupt you. You're just it's so rich. You give me a little line there. Bhagavad-Gita says the biggest cause of our suffering is our like and our dislike, and vairagyam as a concept is some people translate it as detachment, which is fine. I personally prefer relinquishing, because it's not that we have to be detached from everything. It's that we have to let the things that are getting in the way of our other progress, or getting in the way of things that are most essential to us, we have to let those go. So vairagyam is really about not letting like and dislike be the determiners of our action. It's really about letting our knowing, letting our inner guidance really be the determiner, rather than like and dislike.
Right. That's some powerful stuff. I wonder also in this, what do we do when we've chosen a teacher, and for whatever reason, and there's many reasons in the yoga world, we either, for some reason, that relationship ends. In your case, your teacher passed on. In some, there's in the news now, we have a lot of, huge blow-ups in the yoga world where a teacher is being called out for unethical behavior. Or it could just be that you feel like you've learned all that you can learn from this teacher. Then is that kind of that letting go as well?
Yes, absolutely. I tell you, I had this, you listen to that, you referenced the Jay Brown podcast that I was in. I had this situation on my own because a few situations arose around Mr. Desikachar's son that made me doubt his integrity. And I really faced one of those. Well, wait a minute. I'm a Vini yoga teacher. These are the teachings around which I based my life, and yet this behavior of this man is not consistent with the teachings, and is really I don't think that I feel peaceful remaining associated with it. Right. So there you have rock and there you have hard place. Wait, I am a Vinyasa teacher, and but his son is not ethical. So, I think the long and the short of it for me was that the ethical piece is the most important. If you look at Ashtanga, if you look at Yoga Sutra, the first Ashtanga yoga is yama. It's ethics. If you don't have the ethical piece, then it doesn't matter if you are a good talker or amazing asana, or how deep your breath is, or how stable your focus is, etc. The foundational piece of yoga practice is ethics, integrity. And so vairagyam is being able to relinquish all the other connections. And, I have had a very deep and personal relationship with Mr. Desikachar and all the members of his family, and I feel immense gratitude for what they gave me and for the opportunities. And I really sincerely feel like Mr. Desikachar, he saved my life. He pulled me out of a sort of business I didn't want to be in, and sent me on, and gave me tools to share with other people. And I owe my livelihood to him in every way. And the same can be said of his son and of his wife. And yet, the foundation of who we are and how we run ourselves and operate ourselves is fundamentally important, I think. So, for me, I ended up leaving the organization, and at the same time, Mr. Desikachar was also very ill, and his functioning was greatly reduced, and he was really not accessible to anyone outside of the family. And when I left, it took about a year and a half, but maybe 2 years, but then I took on a new mentor. So I now study with a man named Paul Harvey in the UK, and he directs my practices, and I meet with him usually around 3 times a month. And we do a lot of things. We do studies, and we do directing of personal practice and whatnot. And what I would say is that I think people leave a teacher for lots of reasons. Could be ethics, but it can also be that, it just feels like it's time for a different relationship, or it feels like I would like to move in a different direction. My interests are taking me somewhere that is not a strength of this particular teacher. And in my discussions with them, what it comes to is that it might be a better fit, or it might be more beneficial, or it might, whatever the thing is, for me to transfer my my mentoring over to another person. So the thing for me around this is that this is very normal, very usual. I don't think it's a big deal, but I do think it requires honesty and communication. And I've had plenty of students who have decided that I'm not the person to be directing their practice anymore, and most of them we still have a really nice relationship, and there's a lot of gratitude on both of our parts from what we both received from the relationship, and they're studying with somebody else. And so for me, I think it's critical that we don't do teacher of the week, like make a commitment. Make a commitment. Stay with it. Give it time, few years, etc. And then, okay, if something comes up, then have a discussion around it. Talk about it. If yoga is working, then the individual is becoming more of themselves and really gaining in confidence about their clarity. So, the only thing you can ever hope for somebody is that they become them. And when they become them, they go off and do what they're here to do. And it may not be at all what you had in mind for them as a student.
It sounds a lot to me like being a parent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the only thing you can do is just like shake their hand and give them a hug and go like, right on, be you. Yeah. Wow. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. Yeah. I already feel like already my 3 are going to be teenagers soon, and that is exactly what happens. I'm like, I think I know best, but they're telling me, actually, you don't.
That's lovely, Mom. That's so lovely.
When you were talking about you finding a new teacher, all of a sudden I had a lot of hope. Like, I was thinking you must not have a new mentor now. Like, you'd just be thinking who's gonna match that. But you found one. So this gives none of us an excuse for finding a mentor as a yoga teacher.
Thank you. Well, I just to refer back to the story of my getting sent home from tonight, hopefully it means that some of the lesson was learned.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating. I am thrilled to hear you say that. I don't know. I'm thrilled to hear you question lineages and yoga. And in that, I feel like there are a lot of answers in that as well. For me, anyway. I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Thank you. I think that this is important. I really feel that something is passed down from one generation to the next through the interaction. And it's not attainable through a book, I don't think. And I don't think it's attainable. It's less attainable through a group class. I think it really is important to have individual classes and have somebody directing your practice. I really do. And all the other things about like, what do we call it? And what are the trappings of it? And all of that stuff is just secondarily important. The real key thing is that somebody has done their work and continues to do their work, and then they have a care and an insight into us, and so they can be a model, and they have an understanding of how the process works, and they can help hold space and hold our process as we do it. I think it's really it's a really critically important part of yoga, and I wish that it was emphasized more in our Western context. I'll just say that we have these. The Yoga Well Institute does trainings. In fact,
yeah, and you do yoga therapy, like therapeutic yoga trainings.
Correct. In fact, we have one coming up in Nashville, Tennessee, starting in April, and all of our trainings have a big one-on-one component. Like everybody, like in the therapy training, you have to do 40 hours of one-on-one training with your teacher. And we if you don't have one, we can help connect and help you establish that relationship, etc. But the point is that how can we expect to be this for other people if we don't do it ourselves? If we want to be a good yoga teacher, we have to do yoga. I mean, we have to, it's like, hello, If we want to be a good yoga teacher, we have to be yoga. And I think if we want to be good one-on-one yoga teachers, that we need to undergo the process ourselves and really be willing to participate in it as an open and malleable person. So I think it's really important.
I think so too. I think it also really brings back that accountability piece. I see a lot of yoga teachers jumping into another yoga teacher training, and I think that's what they're looking for. I think they're looking for that, I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm accountable, I'm focused on my own practice, and then boom, the training's over and they're out on their own again.
Right. This is so perceptive. I really agree. One thing that we do at the Yoga Well Institute is that if you send us an email, so it's thewell at yogawell.com, we offer, it's actually me that does it. It's a 30-minute free conversation. It's an interview. Who are you? What's your background? Where do you live? What are you wanting to accomplish? What are your goals, etc.? What kind of mentor is useful for you? And then we give introductions. So they're not assignments. So it's not like you do this and then you're assigned a mentor and you got to get. No, it's like you come and we give these introductions. And so, if people are feeling like, I live in the middle of nowhere, or, where do I find a teacher or somebody that I can really feel good about their background, et cetera? Well, send us an email and we'll get you this interview and we'll give you some introductions.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's like matchmaker to your yoga teacher.
Yeah.
I like that because we can't all travel to India and then find a yoga guru. Or, do you ever feel like what even landed you in that position where that's not what you were doing? You were not like, I'm going to study yoga.
No, it's dumb luck. And in fact, I fought it pretty hard, actually. It's really just, I think it boils down to luck.
Well, we're lucky because you have a lot to offer the yoga world. And I know some of our listeners and we have a Facebook group, and a lot of people in there are saying, you know what, my yoga looks different. It actually doesn't, I can't put it on Instagram. And that's probably why you're not on Instagram. A picture of a teacher meditating isn't as cool as scorpion pose.
True. Very true. Yes.
It's not as, you can't sell it as well. But,
yeah.
There may be ways that they can, but I think that group of people, or even just that aspect of all of us teachers where we, at some level, we all connect with the philosophy of yoga. And so I appreciate that you're holding strong to that. That's your thing and you're really sharing it.
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you, Shannon.
So the yoga therapy that's done, the training course, I'll make sure that we put a link in the show notes, and that's done in person.
Yeah, so it's a 3.5-year program, 1,008 hours, and there's 626 hours in-person modules. So those are 5-day modules, four times a year, and then there's another 160 some odd hours online. And then there's a lot of one-on-one work and, actual teaching of yoga clients and oversight of that and that kind of thing. So that the in-person things happen in Nashville, Tennessee.
Okay. All right. I will make sure that we link to that. And then in terms of that, do you want to share some of your thoughts on because now we have this governing body, are you a founding member of that, or how does that work, the IAYT?
That's a good question. So I've been a member of it a long time, and I've been active on there. I've been an active voice in there, but I'm not on their board or anything like that. I do have to say that it is a lot of work to be on their board and to volunteer for them, and they do a tremendous amount of work. The IOIT has in the past 3 or 4 years really gotten serious about creating an accreditation. So there's now schools are IAYT accredited, meaning International Association of Yoga Therapists accredited trainings. And that means that we're now as a group, as an industry, creating certified yoga therapists. And I'm a big proponent of this. I think this is a really good idea. I don't think the hour minimums are sufficient. I don't think that it's really I think that we really need to make it much longer, the training requirements, etc. But it's so much better than in the past when anybody could just put up a shingle and say, I'm a yoga therapist. And, you get with all due respect to the Western medical practitioners, yoga's view of how the human system functions is different. Mm-hmm. And just because you're a nurse or a doctor or whatnot does not mean, and you do yoga, does not make you a yoga therapist. Yoga therapy has a whole way of understanding what it is that how the human system functions and why it functions like that. And it is not based on the biochemical model. It's based on prana. It's based on consciousness, and at the same time it shows up in people's bodies and whatnot. And I think it's just really it's so important that we have some legitimacy here, because it's really an important. You can't just have 300 hours of training and call yourself a yoga therapist. That's just a nightmare situation, in my opinion. So the fact that IAYT has taken it on and has really created this nice, excellent first step of accreditation is really positive for our industry, if you want to call it that. And I think it's really good. The other thing that's really happened, which was a huge positive in my opinion, is that Yoga Alliance said we are not yoga therapy. So you can't use their Yoga Alliance training or anything to call yourself a yoga therapist and still be associated with Yoga Alliance. And I think that is a wonderful thing, because it really shows a differentiation. This is about yoga, and this is about yoga therapy, and the level of training and background and understanding of how the human system is functioning, etc., that's needed for yoga therapy is significant. I personally believe that a similar amount of training, etc., is needed for yoga, but we'll take what we can step by step.
That's so true. I know. I remember graduating and then thinking, wow, now I know nothing. I thought I knew something.
Totally. We have these 300-hour trainings that our sort of graduation joke is, okay, now you're prepared to start studying.
That's so true.
We love you. Here's your certificate. Go study.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. And for the yoga teachers who are new, just know we were all there too. Like, we were just like, oh, we know nothing. And now I feel like it's a lifelong thing. It's not over.
Yeah, it so is. Yeah, I really agree.
Yeah. What does your practice look like, your own yoga practice?
Mr. Desikachar always used to answer this question with, next question, please.
Really?
Yeah, because at his level, people will just be like, what's he doing? That's what I'm going to do, because that's what you do to be enlightened. And the point is don't do what he did, because what he's doing is good for him, but what you need is something different. So I have an asana and pranayama practice in the morning that together takes about an hour and 10 minutes. And then in the afternoon, I have a pranayama chanting and meditation practice that, depending on the day, takes between an hour and an hour and a half. So I really, when I met my now wife on our first date, I said to her, I'm a yoga teacher, and what that means is that I actually practice. I practice twice a day. And so in the afternoon, I disappear, and, so you have to sort of be down for that. And, she was like, all right, yeah, fine, whatever. And then, so maybe a few months into the dating, we went to this friend's house, and, it was like for the day. And I was like, got to be the afternoon. I was like, so, I'm just I need some room in your house. I'll be back in, an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. And my wife was like, what? You're going to leave? You're going to go practice or whatever? So there was a little bit of a conflict until I actually missed a few of my practices. And then she became a big proponent of me practicing in the afternoon.
She was like, oh, you're a much nicer person. That's what happens in this house. Sean will gently say to me, how long has it been since you practiced?
Yes. Perfect.
What do you do on those days? Did you ever in the beginning have this time like, I struggle with this. I practice regularly, and then I'm like, actually, I just want to sleep in today.
Yeah, of course. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah?
I mean, it's an ongoing thing. I think that everybody has those moments. When things are going well, your system is running well, and system is more balanced, then it's easy to do things that bring it to balance, because those things they're in alignment with the way the system is already functioning. And when you're out of balance, then it's much harder to do the things that will bring you into balance, because those things are not really as much in alignment as to your current state.
Right.
So, it's one of those catch-22s. When you need it the most is when it's the hardest to do. What I would say to that is that there's several answers. One is, if I just really can't do something, I always make it a point of just saying, okay, I'm only going to be here for 10 minutes. I'm going to do some chanting. And then that inevitably works out to be a lot longer time. I just have to get on my cushion, or I just have to sit on the mat and start doing something. And then it's like, all right, okay, yeah, good. And then, and then I figure out how to actually have a significant practice in that time. And the other thing I think that's really useful is, I think it's useful to be led. This is one of the functions of the Wednesday morning meditations that I do online, is that it's really designed for people to be led once a week. And then you have an interesting experience, and usually it's reasonably powerful, and it juices you up somehow, and then it's just easier to keep going on with your own practice. So there's no doubt that your own personal practice is by far the most important thing. You gotta do your own practice every day. But I think that being led every week or every other week is very useful for maintaining one's own personal practice. And also, just what I was saying earlier, you just got to make the commitment that I'm going to do something. So even if it's 5 minutes, because 5 minutes, once you're there and you're doing it, it'll be more than 5 minutes. But just getting there and doing it is the
hardest part.
That's right.
We joke in our house, and I'm part of the joke, that I'm like a bear coming out of hibernation in the morning.
Right.
And the best time to practice is 5 a.m. before the kids wake up. So
Yeah, but there's so many things that are involved there, because you're going to get up at 5. That means you went to bed at a reasonable hour. And if you went to bed at a reasonable hour, that means that a whole bunch of other things happened in order to allow you to go to bed. There's yeah.
Yes, that is exactly what happens here. Checking Facebook at 8 p.m. cannot be happening.
Oh, no.
We have the internet to shut down at 8 o'clock. But I know where the button is to turn it back on. Anyway, that's an ongoing discussion in our house.
Right.
Well, I love it that you also made this commitment and made that very clear to your now wife, and that she saw the importance of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chase. This has been enlightening beyond my expectations, and a lot of fun. I love that you bring laughter and a lighthearted manner to this. Sometimes these are really heavy subjects, and so thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Shannon. I really enjoyed my time too. You asked great questions and share your own experiences, and to me, that's really an important part of the yoga teaching. So, thank you.
Huge gratitude, Chase. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Well, Connected Yoga Teachers, I would love to hear what your key takeaways are from today's episode. I feel like I have so many, and I think it's because I've listened to the audio a couple of times. I keep finding a new little thread. If you are wanting to hear more about Chase's life and more stories about his mentor and just his yoga journey, I would highly recommend listening to the Jay Brown podcast. We'll link to that in the show notes. For me, one of the key takeaways here was I really appreciated how Chase said after even a 300 hour, that's the point where you can dive in and start learning. And I know I've talked to many of you in our niche course or in consultation calls about choosing one way that you can learn and dive in and just do it in little small amounts, not getting overwhelmed with the amount that you don't know, but instead just seeing how you can take in just a little bit at a time. Maybe one of those ways is through this podcast, and I'm curious to hear if you got our 50th episode gift. I've heard from many of you some great feedback that you are loving our compilation of our first 50 episodes. So we put together a PDF for all of you that has a summary of our episodes, our first 50 episodes of the podcast. And in that, there are a couple of points for each one, and each title is a clickable link that will take you directly to that podcast. Next week, I'm going to be back here, same time, and it is a big deal, you guys. It's our podcast anniversary. I talk about what it's been like to launch this podcast and the Facebook group and what it's like to maintain all of that. Thank you for sending in your questions and your emails and your audio clips. If you would like to give a podiversary gift, it would be fantastic to get a review. You can either leave one in iTunes, on our Facebook page, or via voicemail. You can do that always from our connectedyogateacher.com homepage. There's a little button over on the right where you can leave a voicemail. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, stay connected to self, to your practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.